It's football and other F words. I'm Zach Lige. You can follow me on Twitter at FWordsPod. I'm joined by the whole gang here. We got Mike at Mike Herndon NFL, who writes for PaulKarski.com. And, of course, Stoney Keeley at Stoney Keeley on X, StackingTheInbox.com, the SoBrosNetwork.com. We got a lot to get to today because we are starting our positional breakdowns. We're going position group by position group on each episode all the way into the preseason game and breaking down some interesting topics, some things to look for to just kind of get you updated on everything. And, of course, mandatory minicamp is in full swing. We got all kinds of topics coming out from that. We got press conferences, we got reactions, and we got the stuff from last week because we were not here last week. So we got all kinds of stuff that we got to get to. Before we get to all that, Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, Tennessee, been around for over 50 years, a long-standing tradition here in Hendersonville, Tennessee on Main Street. Head over to Bluegrass Beverages, our lovely sponsor. Get all the party supplies that you need. 4th of July is just a little bit over a month away, or under a month away, so you might as well just go ahead and start, packing up your garage fridge. There are many lakes nearby Bluegrass Beverages, which constitutes meaning that you have in your garage, if you are on the lake, a white plastic refrigerator that has probably been there just as long as Bluegrass Beverages has been in business. So it's time to go ahead and just start filling it up because you're going to have lake time. You're going to be on the lake. You don't want to have to take a break, get off the boat because you ran off a beer and then go to the store. Just go to Bluegrass Beverages, get all the alcohol that you need in preparation for the July 4th.
Hey,
all
listen,
right.
You don't have to get ready if you stay ready.
That's right. The biggest question, I'll start with you, Mike, is how long will DeAndre Hopkins holdout continue? Because it's obviously at full force holdout. He is lollygagging at practice in a practice that is he really there because he's holding out. So most people don't hold out. And so how long do you expect this holdout from DeAndre Hopkins to last?
I mean, possibly till the end of the season at this rate. I mean, clearly he's really drawing a hard line with the Titans on this contract standoff. It is the most ridiculous narrative that's just been fabricated out of thin air. He missed one practice. He's been here for all the non-mandatory stuff, which he totally does not have to be. By the way, I mean he's probably the most experienced guy on the team from an NFL experience standpoint at this point. If he was missing, no one should be saying boo about it, right? For all the voluntary stuff. And so, yeah, it's an absurd dead period of the off season sports radio topic that you just got to be talking about something. You got to be creating some sort of controversy or discussion topic. So why not make up a super double secret contract holdout, which is just peak June sports topics.
Well, Stoney, I'll ask you a different question that has to do with DeAndre Hopkins. When will the straight up trade for DeAndre Hopkins from T. Higgins be complete?
I don't know. I'll have to connect with my sources on that one, but I'm not even sure DeAndre Hopkins is still a Tennessee Titan at this point, the way the news is going.
It's a ridiculous narrative. I mean, this whole thing with DeAndre Hopkins was ridiculous from the get-go, and we talked about it on a football show last Thursday with Easton about how just the reporting around it was just piss poor. I mean, even the reporting of this is why he missed because of this, and not realizing that Will Levis was actually there too and at the OTAs. So he was there at the event and at OTAs because after OTAs. So it was just piss poor reporting the whole way around, and it was a big nothing burger. And speaking of nothing burgers, we're going to start the top of the show with a fantastic clip from Robbie and Rexroad this morning of PK parodying Jared Stillman with an impression and everything about some of the absences that were at mandatory minicamp.
Everything you said, I agree with, but we're talking, I think the conversation is tied to decisions in the offseason. And so Sneed, risk. There were red flags. Sweat, risk. There are red flags. And I will contend that however those turn out, it will have a pretty significant impact on this defense and this season and this bottom line.
Did you say when they traded for Sneed and when they drafted Sweat, I'm going to make my judgment about their injury stuff on June 8th.
No, this is where I stopped defending him. No, that was my brief little.
You know what? No. When they brought these guys in, I said, at the end of minicamp, that's when I'm going to know if I'm right about these injuries. And I'm right. The one guy's fat and he's out of shape. And at the end of minicamp, I'll know. I will know if the guy is a player in the league or not, because he will have been out there working with Tracy Rocker on the sleds. And if he's not out there working on the sleds, how could he have a career? How is it possible that the guy could do anything in any game in what might be an 8-year, 10-year career if he can't hit the sleds on June 11th, next Tuesday? That's my deadline. If he's not out there on the 11th, he can't play. And Sneed with the knee, if that knee can't get him on the field next Tuesday, there is no way. This is more Mad Dog Russo than if he cannot run with the corners on Tuesday, next Tuesday, the 11th, the last day of this minicamp, the minicamp of all minicamps, the most important minicamp in the history of the Tennessee Titans, who I've been watching since I was knee-high on my dad, eating those damn pizzas that everybody hates that I love at Nissan Stadium. If he can't run with the corners on June 11th at minicamp, he's done. Forget about Chicago on the 8th.
Well,
right. Forget about the home opener on the 15th. Forget about the whole season. It's done.
I will.
Oh man,
that was PK this morning on Robbie and Rexford doing his weekly spot, and it was a pitch perfect impression. But it's all about talking about obviously Stillman's overreaction, how he opened up the show, was saying that basically nobody was at practice yesterday, and this is what he said. They were a few players missing away from me being on the field, is what Stillman says. I mean, nobody of consequence was on the field. And, of course, he's referencing L'Jarius Sneed, T'Vondre Sweat. So I'm going to start with you, Stoney. The L'Jarius Sneed thing feels really – I feel like a lot of people are surprised that he's being load managed when – he talked about he already knows what the process needs to be. He knows what his body needs to do. He talked about that in the presser. We know that Kansas City had a great load management skill that equated to him having a career year. And he did not participate in hardly any of the mandatory stuff. And I called it on the football show. I said, here's what's going to happen. L'Jarius Sneed is going to show up. He's going to do the stretch, and he's going to go back inside. Now, today he did the second field, but guess what he did yesterday? He showed up, did the stretch, went back inside. Because that's what we have grown to expect. It wasn't that I was some precognitive, psychic. It's what we have been told. So I give it over to you. Kind of sounded like there was maybe a minor, scoping procedure, some kind of procedure on the knee. But at the end of the day, are you concerned at all that Sneed is missing this time for anything?
No, absolutely not. Because like you said, I'm glad you brought it up. Like, the expectations were set pretty early on after the signing, and you had gone back through his history with the Kansas City Chiefs, looking at his practice record and everything. And if people just listen to the show, I mean, sometimes, listen, I have trouble keeping up with what we've texted each other, what we've talked about at the bar, and what we've actually said on air. But I was kind of thinking, I thought we talked about this on air pretty early on after the Sneed signing, that there was going to be a lot of load management. And if I'm not mistaken, one of you guys, or it might have been Braden or Easton or JT, someone in this podcast network said something about the fan base is probably going to get pretty frustrated with this situation throughout the summer, because they're going to think, oh, he's hurt, he can't play. And I mean, it's a data issue. It's looking back at what he did in Kansas City, how he practiced there. It is a situation that we were told about up front, and everything seems to be going according to plan. I don't see anything happening with L'Jarius Sneed right now that we didn't have some sort of advanced warning or inkling that it was going to happen this way. So until something like that changes, or if, he gets out there and his leg's broken in half, obviously that's going to change the narrative. But there's no reason to press the panic button on this guy right now because we were told this is exactly how it's going to happen, and this is how it's happening.
Well, Mike, I mean, Denard Wilson talked today because he was asked a question. He's like, first off, I love Denard Wilson pressers, and credit to Nick Holtz. He's really coming to his own. His response to the Antonio Gates question was fantastic. But Denard Wilson was like, yeah, well, he's a productive player in this league. Did you watch him play last year?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that that's the whole thing. So, I mean, Mike, I'm assuming you're going to echo more of the same, but what did you think about Denard Wilson also backing up? Like, it's kind of common sense that this was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, and like you guys said, we talked about it immediately after the trade that, look, the knee thing, because there were some rumblings out there and everything like that. And Zach, you went back and did the digging through the data as far as like practice reports from Kansas City and
every
everything like
freaking
that.
practice report.
And I think it was maybe he practiced like 8 times or in full or something like that over the course of that season. So like, and clearly he didn't need to practice to produce at a high level. And what Denard Wilson's point was, hey, yeah, this is a production business. It's not a attendance business, right? Yes, you want your guys in an ideal world. Yes, you'd have everyone out there for every practice and everyone would be healthy and no one would ever turn an ankle or no one would ever have knee issues or anything like that. But that's not the reality of the NFL. And the reality of the NFL is that if you can produce on Sundays, you can do whatever you want during the week, right? Like as long as you get to Sunday and you know the playbook, your body is prepared and you can execute it as a high level. That is what they care about. Like these are grown-ups, right? Like this isn't you got to take attendance at every OTA all summer. And if you show up, if you miss some of them, you're getting demerits or whatever. Like it is what it is. Like they knew the deal with Sneed. They knew it when they got into the deal, right? Like they talked about it day one when he signed the contract and they were questioned about it. And they said, yeah, we are aware of it. We are comfortable with it and we're going to work through it. So clearly they have a plan. They're working the plan. Everyone will freak out about it. Everyone will freak out about it all through training camp when he's barely out there. I get it. I understand there's like PTSD from Julio Jones and any other number of guys that have come in and not been able to make it all the way through practicing every day. But the fact that Sneed did this almost exact same routine last year and produced at a high level, played in every game, was not an issue on the field. Clearly, gives me a lot more comfort with this whole thing. Like I'm not going to be worried about it until like, oh no, he's missed 2 games in a row and we really don't know what's going on or when he's going to be able to get back out there. Like wake me up when the season starts on the L'Jarius Sneed knee issue talk. I just don't care about it. I don't care about it one bit from now until September 8th.
Well, and for those that are worried, L'Jarius Sneed is coming into a new system. Steve Spagnuolo and Denard Wilson have a lot of similarities, apparently, according to Denard Wilson himself, who so it should not be hard for L'Jarius Sneed to make that transition.
And also, look,
go ahead.
If you're going to run press man is easy. Like, hey, you got this dude. Don't let him catch the ball. Like, it's not a ton of coordination that has to go into that.
I'll tell you, it's even easier when you can punch the guy off the line of scrimmage and knock him to the ground, and then you don't have to worry about him getting into his route at all.
He doesn't even need those for that.
For those Chief practices, the Chiefs had 63 practices from week 1 of the regular season to the Super Bowl. 43, 68.3%. He was a full participant at practice.
Okay.
14, he was limited. So 14 individual practices, he was limited, and 6 individual practices he did not participate. Week 17 and 18 were the 6 did not participate. Week 17, he played 98% of the snaps. So those 3 did not matter. And the week 18 was obviously a rest day heading into the playoffs. 17 games of 100% snaps played, 4 are playoffs. Other 3, 82%, 94%, and 98% of the snaps he played. So again, this was everything that he did last year in Kansas City he's doing here in Tennessee because it obviously translated to the regular season. Now, T'Vondre Sweat signed his contract, absent yesterday on Monday, absent on Tuesday, absent on Wednesday. A little surprised that he's not back at practice yet, but I am not pulling any kind of alarms or anything. I think there's a lot to be made. PK kind of reported last week that or at some point, I think it was last week, like he'd be kind of, he's kind of expecting him to be back at last week's voluntary OTAs.
Mm-hmm.
And then this morning he said he suspects that something about the lower body with T'Vondre Sweat. So maybe a hammy, a soft muscle injury.
It sounds like a hammy to me, right? Like,
but we talk about responsibilities, right? We talk about L'Jarius Sneed, his responsibilities in press coverage. The responsibilities of T'Vondre Sweat is just go after the quarterback and stop the run, right? Like it kind of feels like a defensive tackle has kind of easy responsibilities, especially maybe his particular position on the defensive line. But Ramon Foster had an interesting take this morning. It has nothing to do with the weight clause, which we've all talked about. And like, listen, nobody's a fucking genius for bringing up that there's going to be a weight clause in the contract of T'Vondre Sweat. Because guess what? Brian Callahan told everybody that
they talked about
day
it.
one in the first presser. He literally said, hey, we told him that it's going to cost him money. Being overweight and out of shape is going to cost you money. It's going to cost you your contract and all this kind of stuff. The only way it could cost him is if they put a clause in the contract. And obviously they were going to put a clause in the contract because they also said they were going to have weight parameters for him. I digress. Just a lot of people are acting like this is some big fucking deal. And it's like, no, we were told that day one when he was drafted. But Ramon Foster said he kind of likes this because first off, just because it's a lower body injury does not mean he's just sitting on his, or let me rephrase it. Ramon said just because it's an injury doesn't mean he's sitting on his ass. He didn't say lower body. So doesn't mean he's sitting on his ass, right? He's obviously still working out to some degree. Maybe it's a lower body injury, but you know, he's losing weight, right? We know he's lost weight. So look at it this way. For the people who say, well, he needs to be conditioned, look at it this way. He was 390 pounds. And if my memory recalls, he played the second most snaps out of any defensive tackle in this draft class, the most on his own team. Okay, so let's throw that out there real quick. Now he's at 390. We already know he's at 366. Your conditioning doesn't get worse with less weight. Like his conditioning is probably a lot better right now. He's probably feeling a lot better. Now he's the NFL shape or NFL ready. We'll see. We don't know what's going on inside the building, but I have more faith in this strength and conditioning staff than I do any of the previous strength and conditioning staff, that they know what they're doing. We don't know what he's doing in workouts inside during his free time. We don't know. So we can't sit here. You can kind of say that, yes, he's probably not football shape. And Mike, I'm going to toss it to you first. But I think saying that he is out of shape is a little much.
Yeah. And I think here's the bigger thing with the conditioning question right now. The players get like 6 weeks off after, I think, the last phase of OTAs before training camp starts. What he does in those 6 weeks.
That's if they even practice next week. I mean, sometimes you get these last OTAs canceled.
Yeah. So what he does in that period of time between now and the start of training camp is going to have way more bearing on what his conditioning looks like for the start of the season than what he's doing in June. Because, I mean, look, we're still 3 months out, and he could be busting his ass out there right now. And then if he goes and sits, for 6 weeks in front of the TV and plays video games and eats Oreos every day, then whatever he's doing right now would be gone anyways. It's going to be about a long burn, a consistent routine. And sure, would it be better if he was out there right now? Yes, of course it would be. Like I said with Sneed, if everyone was out there and nobody ever missed time, it would be great. I agree. But it's certainly not the time to pull any, alarm bells or anything. And if he's missing big chunks of training camp, maybe you start to get some alarm there. But to me, again, they're going to be super cautious with any injury, because the worst thing that could happen right now, let's say it is a hamstring, which we don't know, we're not reporting that. I'm just speculating or guessing, using it as an example, really. Hamstring, notoriously tricky about if you try to come back too quick, you can redo it, you can make it worse, like things like that. So they're going to be super cautious.
Pounds or 110 pounds.
Exactly.
The hamstring is one of the trickiest injuries to come back from. If
Christian Watson has terrible hamstrings, right? He's skinny. He's super skinny. Like this is a totally separate conversation from his weight. So I think it's a deal where they're going to be super cautious. They're going to make sure that what he does right now is trying to force, like if he tried to force his way back onto the field and then he actually did make it worse to where it became something that was going to linger either right up to training camp or into training camp, that would be a disaster, right? Like that is far worse than him missing 2 or 3 days of, mandatory minicamp in June. So I think it's going to be them being cautious. Again, I'm not worried about any of this stuff right now. And I'm not even stressing over like the daily attendance from the media that they put out there. I barely even look at those right now because I just don't care, who's out there at the moment. It's fine. Nobody's holding out. Nobody's got a season-ending injury. It's all going to be okay. Training camp is a long time, and there's a lot of conditioning progress that can be made between the start of training camp and the start of the season, and also over that 6-week period leading up to training camp. So plenty of time for Sweat to get where he needs to be before September 8th.
Well, speaking of getting there and all this and this new regime and all that, so Stoney, I kind of want to toss this question to you because we were talking about it just a few minutes ago, just in the Sobros Network chat. But Molden, Weaver, and Key have all been critical, I guess would be a good word, critical of the prior coaching staff's approach to coaching, I guess you could say, or at least practice coaching. And Joe Rexrode has tried to sweep this under the rug as a big nothing burger, but luckily he asked a question to Elijah Molden that made Joe prior rants against me look silly because Elijah Molden once again sided with Arden Key about the fixing the mistakes and Weaver's talking about how they never heard anything positive. And maybe it's because, Weaver didn't do anything positive, but that's another story. But it seems like there was a big difference to me in coaching, the way that they were coaching and teaching. And it's a part of a larger discussion, but it seems like the old heads of the media think that, well, they called them out on it. They yelled at them for tripping down or not turning their head around or something. But there's no teaching of how to fix that. So what are your takes on the Molden, Weaver, and Key things, Stoney?
I will say it does kind of bug me a little bit the way that Arden Key delivered his response to that question, because I think it kind of sparked the Titans fan base to kind of dogpile Mike Vrabel again. And at a certain point, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I don't want to talk about Mike Vrabel anymore. Like, he's with the Cleveland Browns. Let's move on. The way I phrased it was, stop thinking about your ex. It's time to move on. But I also think like just swiping it under the rug as nothing more than sour grapes is a little, it's a little careless too, because I do think it is valuable insight into how the previous regime operated their practices. Now, we can say it's refreshing right now that they're taking the time to stop and slow down and correct mistakes before they move on now. But we still have to operate under the premise that they haven't played a down of football yet. So we can't call a method a success until we see the results. So I think people are kind of losing sight of those two things. It's like, just because they're doing it different doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to lead to better results right now. And they're also leaping at the opportunity to say, I told you so. Gotcha, Mike Vrabel, eat it. Kind of deal. And that's the part of the conversation that does bother me a little bit. But I think when you get to the valuable insight provided, I do think that it brings up an interesting philosophical discussion, because I've heard people describe it as, okay, it's a matter of how you want to use the practice time you're allotted, because there is a finite number to that. You're not just out there all day practicing. So if you can sort of streamline the process by just, if a guy doesn't get it, he doesn't get it. Let's get somebody in here that does get it. And maybe they're not as athletically gifted as the guy next to them, but at least we know that they know where they're going to be. We can trust them. And that's where I land on this, is that it kind of feels like this previous regime was more or less saying, if you don't get it, fuck it, we'll get somebody in here that can. And if you don't get it in practice, you're not going to get on the field in these certain situations that we're running this stuff that you can't grasp. And so putting the onus on the player, I think at times, another thing that we tend to hyper-focus on the last 2 years of Mike Vrabel. But when their defensive system worked and they had guys in there that understood their roles, could communicate, knew where to be, it did work. Now, I will say, I think as far as teaching and development goes, I like the method of slowing guys down to say, here's what you have to do to fix it. It's just a matter of how you allocate the resources of time during practice. If you can get away with doing that, I do think that's a better path for development. And what happened with Mike Vrabel, the hourglass ran out and he didn't develop enough players on the back end to have quality depth. Part of that was John Robinson for sure, not adding quality players. But those last couple of years, it didn't seem like there were too many guys that were rising up from the ranks of the day 3 picks, the undrafted guys. Like there wasn't a whole lot of player development going on. So I think it's an interesting conversation to have. I think it's disingenuous to just, use this as another way to take a shot at Mike Vrabel. I think it's a disingenuous thing to just pretend like it's nothing either, because it is valuable insight. And the answer, as I often land on, is somewhere in the middle.
And
Mike,
I think, yeah, I think to add to what Stoney just said, because I think the point about the time usage and how you allocate that is the critical part of this, because there are 2 different philosophies on that. One is it sounds like what Callahan does, and this is interesting because it is an insight into how they view things and how they teach, right, versus how Vrabel taught. And again, I agree with Stoney. I don't know that there is necessarily a right or wrong answer between these 2. I think it maybe depends on the kind of team that you got, how those guys learn best, the individual player in some instances, things like that, and even maybe the coaches and how they are more comfortable from a teaching standpoint. So one, I know Vrabel was absolutely correcting things, but were they stopping practice and saying and demonstrating, no, you get to this spot on the field, this is your landmark, you missed the landmark, you got to hit this and do that. I don't think they were stopping that to do that because of the reps. And like you said, you are limited by the CBA as far as the amount of time that you can spend on the practice field every day. And so you are capped at that. And those are valuable. That's the most valuable time you have as a coach, is actually getting reps on the field, because you have all kinds of time. There are limits to the amount of times that guys can be in the building, but you can give them stuff to look at from film and stuff like that they can take home on their iPads, do it at home, stuff like that. There's a lot more flexibility with some of the back end teaching. But I think what Vrabel was doing was going, all right, we're moving on to the next play. I'm going to tell you screwed something up here loudly and probably colorfully. And we're moving on to the next play because we've got to get these reps in. We want to get X number of reps with this play, X number of reps with that play. We want to hit these landmarks that we believe are important to making our players feel comfortable with our system. We're going to go back and we're going to look at the film from practice later, because that's something that I don't know that everyone realizes how an actual NFL day works during the offseason. But there are meetings, then they go to practice. There's meetings, there's generally a morning lift, there's treatment, then they go to practice for a couple hours. They do their media responsibilities. They come back in, they get some more treatment. They go and back into the meeting rooms, and then they review the tape from practice. And I guarantee what Vrabel was doing was taking those mistake reps and saying, we're going to fix it in the building after. We're going to look at the tape from practice. We're going to say, this is why, this is how you messed up. So was he stopping practice to say, we're fixing it right now before we move forward? No, apparently not. But I do believe he was fixing it in the back end. And maybe those players don't learn as well that way. And maybe that's what Arden Key and Elijah Molden and some of these guys feel, is that maybe they felt like, well, now I'm out of the moment. Now I can't see it the way I saw it, in that moment on the field. And I would have rather had it corrected while I'm doing it, so maybe I can fix it for the rest of practice. I don't know that there's a right answer or a wrong answer, because the way Callahan's doing it is great in some respects, but it does limit. I mean, it's going to take away reps. You're going to lose reps from, whether it's an individual period or whether it's you're not going to be able to get in a certain concept that day or whatever. So like there's a give and take with it, and it's how you want to spend your time. And people are going to use it to dunk on Vrabel, because that's, all of a sudden Vrabel, the guy that took a team that was, had Ryan Tannehill as its quarterback and, a rookie wide receiver and all that, to the AFC Championship game in 2019, has become the dumbest person in the history of football over the last 2 years. And now every fan knows better than him. He's a Super Bowl champion. Everyone who ever talks to him, Bill Belichick, anyone else, thinks he's a brilliant football mind. But no, he's an idiot. Because
so brilliant. He's just hanging out at Cleveland right now. So brilliant. I will say this.
I think he is a brilliant mind. That doesn't mean he's the best football coach of all time.
This idea that the NFL views him highly respectable as some genius and nobody hired him. Those things kind of don't coincide.
Everyone believes Bill Belichick's a genius, right? And he didn't get hired either.
But nobody does now. They believe that he is the genius of the past.
I will go to my deathbed believing that the reason that Mike Vrabel did not get hired this cycle is because of the shit with Rand Carthon and A.B. Adam Strong, and the fact that all that stuff got out, and everyone around the league looked at him and went, oh, man, this guy can't play nice with ownership or, front office. We aren't bringing that into our building right now.
I think I do need to push back on one thing, though, because you guys say that there's no good or bad answer, or right or wrong answer with how you approach this thing. And in general, I agree. But if your players are not fixing the mistakes, you need to adapt. And I feel like that's another big thing that we need to bring up, is that Mike Vrabel just never adapted throughout his whole tenure here. It was his way or the highway. You got to do things my way. And when you really need to adapt to what the player's learning style, you can communicate a message, the same message with the same words to many people, but there's a difference in how you should be communicating it with multiple people. And that's something that he just never really learned. And I think that's what's leading into this whole thing. Not to say that Mike Vrabel is an idiot coach or anything, because I really don't believe that. But what I'm saying is that he had a group of men that he was not connecting with on these last 2 years. And there's something to be said. And most of these guys have only known the Vrabel way as far as a pro. And I think, except for Arden Key, but I think a lot of these guys that are talking are just like, it's a breath of fresh air kind of thing, more than it is an indictment of the previous regime. But it is a preferred method of how they prefer to learn and how they prefer to be coached. And that's something that falls back onto the coaching staff if you're not doing that to adapt your message to the players that are receiving it, or the people that are receiving. That's what really separates elite leaders, elite coaching in any kind of business from just great guys or good guys or bad ones. I mean, it's how you adapt. And I think there is something to be said that while there is no right or wrong answer in general, both methods can work. It really comes down to the group of players that you have, and the group of players that he's had for 2 years at the minimum were not receiving that message. And I just think that that's something that, again, falls back on the coach to try to adapt. Okay, well, last year didn't really work. Here we are in 2023. What can I do differently to try to change how these guys can learn and grow and all this stuff? And he just didn't do that. I think it's an honest assessment.
And I think that's fair. But I think I can understand how he got there, right? Because it did work in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, right? Like, guys were learning, guys were improving. Damn near everybody on those teams was getting better and producing like best year of their career kind of seasons under Mike Vrabel. And I think that the composition of the team changed. And I do think the talent did drop off. And I think that's a big part of how we're looking at all this, because again, like, we kind of come back to this whole thing of like, Mike Vrabel got worse at coaching, or did his roster just get worse around him? But I do think probably that maybe I agree. But I think the composition of the roster, as far as like younger guys in some key spots that, like, I think Callahan is very much like, and I say this as a compliment, he's very much like a millennial coach, right? Like he is
Well,
gonna
he gets it, right? Because I mean,
Right.
Vrabel was like late '90s. I mean, he basically grew up in the
He's a Gen
Cold
X
War
coach.
era of coaching.
he's a
Like, I
Gen
mean,
X coach, right? Like
yeah.
it's
I
fine.
mean,
Like,
I wouldn't
those
even
are
say
the-
that. I mean, he's like a baby boomer coach in my opinion because
yeah.
he learned how to play. He learned how to play under the baby boomer coach, right? Like, we do it hard. This is how we do it. You got to do this. You got to do that. It's where he
Take
learned
all
to
the
play.
emotion
He
out of
learned
it.
from
Yeah.
Urban Meyer, who we know is a terrible coach. And I think some of this is just maybe coaching
Well,
inexperience
but
too.
look, like again, I don't think Urban Meyer's a terrible coach. I think he's a terrible person, which is a different
He's
thing.
a terrible coach.
But no, he's not a
college
terrible coach. He won national championships at Florida and Ohio State.
Was he a good coach in the pros?
No, he wasn't a good coach in the pros because he's dealing with grown men. But not like again, we like blanket
Let's not
statement.
forget that. Can
he's
we
a-
not forget that Mike Vrabel did choke slam him up against the wall? So
Yeah, look, I think he's an asshole. I think Urban Meyer's an asshole. I think he's always been an asshole. But I'm saying he was a good football coach in college, at least, when he could, bully people into doing what he wanted them to do.
I think that there's a little bit of inexperience that came along with this. Is that I only know one way of doing things, and I don't know how to adapt. Like, and maybe he learns that learning under Stoney's Coach of the Year candidate Kevin Stefanski, who just got an extension. Maybe he'll learn something new, right? Like, I mean, maybe he won't be so close-minded, and he'll pick up on something that will be the next stage of the Mike Vrabel era. Will be that guy that can take a team and adapt with this new NIL, adapt with this new generation, and turn into something. That won't change his time in Tennessee. Listen, I'm on record. I think Mike Vrabel is a better head coach than Jeff Fisher was. I don't care. I know that Jeff Fisher made it to the Super Bowl, but I think Mike Vrabel is a better, more talented coach. But he ran into the same issue that Jeff Fisher did, where it was like adapt or die. It just everything in the NFL nowadays moves at so much of a quicker rate than what it did even during Jeff Fisher's era. It's like quarterbacks nowadays, they have to be the guy by 2 years. If you don't have the guy in 2 years, you're probably getting traded or cut. How many guys did we just see that happen to? If you're not a coach that is trending in the right direction, you're probably out of here in 2 to 3 years. And it's just life comes at you fast in the NFL nowadays. There's no extra long. There's no margin for error in the NFL hardly anymore. It is like a 1 or 2 year thing, and that's just how it happened for Mike Vrabel.
And I think early success may have hurt him in that regard too, as far as like his willingness to adapt. Because look, he knew like when he got here, he had immediate success. He was good from the jump. They got better every year for like 3 or 4 years. And I think part of that, ingrained in his mind, like, hey, I'm doing it the right way. This is the way it needs to be done. We're almost there. We just got to keep pushing to get over that last little hump. And it's hard sometimes if you've had a lot of success doing it one way and then circumstances change to not just think, well, we have to figure out a way to get those circumstances back to, the way it was working before, instead of me changing my mindset and trying a different approach that I don't know whether it's going to work or not because I haven't done it right yet. Right. Like that's a scary thing to do for any leader. It's I think one of the
Also
most
hiring
challenging
bad
things
staff.
about leadership.
Hiring bad staff did not help him.
Well,
at all
100%. 100%. But
Yeah,
again, like I think that was holding on to the past because he was like, this
Yeah.
scheme works. We just need to keep going with this scheme. That's why he kept going from within,
I think it's a really
the-
interesting part of
okay.
this conversation too, thinking about the timing of the hourglass running out on him. Like, just how many bad seasons did Jeff Fisher get away with before, like, given the patience to be good again? And Mike Vrabel's thinking, I've done this successfully in the past. It's only been like a season and a half of just really putrid football on the
And
field.
horrible injury luck and a bad, decaying roster, all that. Yeah.
And I think we all probably thought he was going to get at least another year before he was actually fired. So part of me wonders, like, how much of the conversation centered around that, like that inability to adapt. Did he go into meetings and just die on the hill of it worked before, it can work again if we improve the personnel, that sort of thing? Like, I don't know. This whole conversation is a really interesting case study that I don't think we're really going to know for sure for a couple more years.
Here's the thing about let's move on to Treylon Burks. So we still got a lot to get to. Treylon Burks, the pendulum was swinging positively one way than yesterday. Fans hear that he may have to be on special teams to be active on game days, which first off is a ridiculous statement in and of itself by the coach. And then it swung to the other way that he may not even make this team. And then today it swings back that Burks is the ultimate pro, according to, Anderson and Nick Holtz and all this kind of stuff. Like he's an elite work ethic and all this kind of stuff. So the pendulum keeps swinging on Treylon Burks. So I just kind of want to say a few things about Treylon Burks. One, he's a lock to make this team. He's 100% making this team. Two, he's 100% going to be active on game days, regardless of special teams, because guess what? Who is the outside receiver if one of these guys go down? Jaquan Jackson, just because he was a punt returner or something? Like, we got to get fucking real about how the makeup of NFL teams work. Treylon Burks is going to be an outside wide receiver, and he's going to be a guy that sees meaningful snaps on offense. He's going to be active. Thirdly, he's not fighting for a roster spot. And if he doesn't make special teams, he's not making this roster is ridiculous. But of course, the wide receiver 4 needs to find a place on special teams. Guess what? That's what the NFL does league-wide. Most of these guys play different positions on different units. It does not matter. Quit overreacting to everything. And I would like to also extend that not only from the fans and the media, but I want to extend that to the team. Could y'all just shut the fuck up about it? Can we all quit asking questions about Treylon Burks at this point? Because here's what you're going to get from the team. Right? Here's what you're going to get from the team. Well, he's an elite worker. He's great. He's athletic, blah, blah, blah. We've heard it 30,000 fucking times. Now, listen, if you want to ask about Treylon Burks the gunner, like, what are you looking for from Treylon Burks? What does he have to improve to be a gunner? How many reps are you going to try and get Treylon Burks as a punt returner or kick returner? Because I think he would be very excellent at that. We've kind of talked about that on this show. There are different ways to phrase your necessary Treylon Burks questions that you have to ask. But can we just stop asking, have you been impressed with Treylon Burks? What are they going to say? Nah, fuck Treylon Burks. We're not that impressed with him. Like, come on, people. Let's get creative with the questions. That's my Treylon Burks.
I just hope we derail this hype train for Easton's sake, because if we don't stop, he's going to become the Joker. Last week, all the aggregator accounts are taking his shit like, oh my gosh, let's fit him for his Hall of Fame jacket. And now this week it's, oh my God, take him out back and shoot him. And Easton's just caught in the middle of all this. Like, for the sake of his mental health, I hope we can tamper expectations a little bit.
And I wrote about in StackingInbox.com, you're talking about a guy that's like a 300-yard wide receiver. Like, we got to understand that expectation as a wide receiver 4. He's not going to see a lot of snaps on offense, but the snaps that he does see should probably equate to somewhere around 300 yards. That's it. And there you go. There's your Treylon Burks expectations for everybody. Go read the article at StackingInbox.com. I mean, like,
do you think Bengals reporters asked this much about Trenton Irwin? Played the same role.
God, I don't know. Okay, so we're gonna get to the media next because of what PK said. But did y'all see? And I know, Stoney, I sent it to you, but I don't know if you read it. But did y'all see how the conversation went between the reporters of the Miami and Tua Tagovailoa yesterday? Have you seen this, Mike? What I'm about to reference.
I've not seen it.
So this is what I wish our media would do, right? Okay. So they go, the first question, are you frustrated with where things stand right now? Tua goes, not frustrated. I'm another word. Next question, agitated, annoyed, bothered? I just want to get something done, Tua says. That's it. Just want to get something done. Next question, concerned? Is that? Not concerned. Concerned is not the right word. That's way off from the word. Antsy, maybe? Probably antsy. Pissed off? I wouldn't say pissed off. I mean, this is the nature of the beast. This is how it goes. Like, I wish that, if someone says, ask, because at this point, if after, are you frustrated with things where things stand right now? Not frustrated, I'm another word. Someone asked that to Will Levis, or let's say someone asked someone about, they asked DeAndre Hopkins about that. Let's say that he was frustrated and they asked him about that. So someone in that room is going to be like, well, I saw that you're recording. Instead of staying on this subject and pushing for the word, they would be like, well, I saw that you were recording a country song. And how was you doing a concert? Like, I mean, come on. But this all goes to the fact that I wanted to talk about just real quick. This PK tweet from yesterday that got everybody riled up, where he is 1,000% correct. And this is in reference to asking Brian Callahan, who Brian Callahan responded with a thoughtful answer, not the answer you're looking for, right? If you want information from players and want insight into how your team is doing, this is not the answer, but it is a thoughtful answer and is a logical answer with whatever. And that's not his issue. His issue is still, PK's issue is still with the fact that this is what I guess the state of the Tennessee Titans media is right now. And this is a Callahan misstep, he says. You're getting all the same stuff from Titans media because we are talking to the same handful of guys, mostly in a scrum. Why is it a big deal to approach Burks today to ask about working as a gunner or Jalen Duncan about returning from injury? I know plenty of you will say you don't care, but a lot of you want as much info as you can get. 3 of the 7 players provided today, Jack Gibbons, NWI, and Elijah Molden, got 0 votes when we were asked who we wanted to speak with. So the media is asked, hey, who do y'all want to speak to, blah, 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 and they all throw in the 3 or 4 names, I guess, or something like that. And they sent out 3 players, Jack Gibbons, NWI, and Elijah Molden. I hate that Elijah Molden's in this conversation, but Elijah Molden right now is your starting safety. But they send out Jack Gibbons and NWI. They send out a linebacker you don't care about as fans, and NWI, who's wide receiver 5. Like, what the fuck are we doing here? And fans, of course, he goes, I know plenty of you will say you don't care. And of course, that's what his replies are littered with, are people who are okay with this kind of, analysis on Jack Gibbons and NWI. And let me say this. I love that PK this morning on Robbie and Rex Road called out the cowards in the local media. He called them cowards and said that you all complained with me in their little media room, their meetings. You all complained with me about this. And then what do you guys go do? You guys leave me high and dry, and nobody agrees with me out in public because you guys don't want to, offend your fans or whatever. But then he also says, then you guys go and interview those 3 guys that we didn't even vote for. So they're going to continue to do what you want to do. And for all of you people that are listening, this is me talking to you, that want more insight as far as, man, I'd really love to have one of those LA Ram draft videos. Well, you're not going to get it because you guys are all fucking okay with it. And you guys are all okay with your Dr. Jack Gibby interviews, your NWI interviews, your loser interviews of these players that we do not care about. I know Braden was probably fucking ecstatic about getting an NWI interview because that dude loves him some NWI.
Him and Joe both. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But I thought NWI bailed because I didn't see anybody post a clip about NWI except for I think the Titans official Twitter account did, or official whatever. But this is I agree with PK. And I think that if you guys are giving PK shit for being negative, then you guys are part of the problem because you should want better. You should want more coverage. It gives us more talking points instead of having to talk about the same tired stuff that we always talk about. I'm just saying. There you go. That's my rant. Where do y'all stand on that?
I'm not going to hang you out to dry. I'm going to have your back if this devolves into a fist fight, is what I'm saying. But I don't care about player interviews enough to really feel passionately about this, because what most of I'm doing, what did I just say? What I'm doing the most is just watching film, and I'm taking little bits of information as I get it in tweets. I honestly don't even see a lot of the player interviews unless it's coming to me in the group chat where you guys are like, oh, wow, Nick Holtz came across really well today. And I'm sitting there like, oh, shit, I guess there's a press conference going on right now. So I don't consume enough of it to feel like heavily invested on either side of it. But if you're passionate about it and somebody starts coming after you about it, I'll get your back because you're my boy. I'll just say
it just
that.
Bleeds into other things that the Titans are lazy about, like redoing the same stupid draft thing, which Mike wants them to do the schedule reveal. Mike wants them to do the schedule reveal at the end of time. So there you go. But Mike, you're probably okay with it because you're very white bread, milk toast kind of guy. You probably love this shit. You love Dr. Jack Gibby and NWI interviews.
I don't. I mean, I care even less about those guys. I wish they would, put out the big names more. I mean, I get that there's only so many guys on the roster, right? And they talk to them a lot. So, you don't need Calvin Ridley every single day. But eventually you're going to get down to those guys. So I don't know. I guess I understand. I don't think they have to make those guys available. I think it would be better. Could we hear from even Caleb Farley? He would be more interesting.
He got a vote. Someone voted for him. I don't know who the fuck voted for Caleb Farley, but he got one vote.
I mean, he's an interesting story, a former first-round pick, all the stuff that he's been through, physically, emotionally, everything. He's an interesting story to me. It's a human interest story more so than a Titans, football story, frankly, because I don't think he's going to make the team. But I don't know. Yeah, they could do better. And I agree. I agree totally that the Titans media department is so protective of that group. And I think, Vrabel got blamed for some of it. I think some of it was Vrabel. Robinson got blamed for some of it. I think some of it was Robinson, but I think some of these guys in the media department have been there so long, and this is just what they've known. So this is the way they keep doing things.
Sounds like my little rant on radio show on Monday where Braden's like, well, we can't really talk on the radio about EPA and stuff. I was like, why not? You guys don't ever fucking try because you guys are just fucking lazy.
I did hear that, and I understand what you're gonna lose a lot of common fans if you start throwing out a bunch of numbers and acronyms and stuff like that. I get that, but no, I think things could be. They should loosen things up just a little bit. It's gotten better.
When Rand's on Busted with the Boys and Brian Callahan is, on The Athletic, all these secrets come out. All these insights come out. So it's hard for me right now to think that this is a Titans mandated from either of those guys kind of deal. Now, obviously, I think the player selection process, it sounds like Brian Callahan is a part of, but it just really feels like this is, I'm with you. It just kind of feels like a media department kind of deal. They just, I don't know. Maybe they need to get the creative juices flowing.
I will say
one last
this
rant before we get to the running back. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say quickly, if I was actually in the press room with everybody, I would probably feel much differently about it. Unless I'm working on a 1,000-word film study on Jack Gibbons, if I drive from my home in Mount Juliet out to the practice facility and I show up and it's NWI, Elijah Molden, and Jack Gibbons, and I'm just like, well, shit, I don't want to talk to these guys. I'm just going to go home. I'm going to be pissed because I've just wasted a whole lot of my time. And just say that.
I got one real quick beef because we still haven't got to the running back stuff. These OTA topics went a little bit longer than I thought.
A little bit.
But you know what? I'm going to save it for next week because it's nothing that we need to do right now. Okay, we're moving on to the running backs. It's position group. Let's go. The running back situation for the Tennessee Titans consists of 6 running backs currently. Tony Pollard, Tyjae Spears, Hassan Haskins, Julius Chestnut, Dylan Johnson, Jabari Small. Now, the Tennessee Titans have the 16th most cap space allocated to the running back position at $8.99 million. The 11th most in cash for 2024 with $12.58 million. They have, of course, 6 running backs under contract. Tony Pollard has a 3-year, $21.75 million contract, $10.49 million fully guaranteed with an $8 million cap hit this year. Tyjae Spears is in his year 2 of a 4-year, $5.5 million contract with $1.25 million cap hit. Hassan Haskins, who we all always forget about with good reason, is in his 3rd year of a 4-year, $4.3 million contract with a $1.16 million cap hit. If he were to be cut, they save $985,000. Julius Chestnut is on a 1-year, $985,000 contract. If they cut him, they save $985,000 against the cap. Dylan Johnson signed a 3-year, $2.85 million cap hit, $2.85 million contract with an $800K cap hit. If he were to be cut, they save $770K against the cap. $15,000 signing bonus, which is tied for the most among the undrafted free agents. Jabari Small signed a 3-year, $2.84 million contract with a $5,000 signing bonus, a $797K cap hit, and they would get save $785 if he were to be cut. So that is the current state of the running back room and the roster and the contracts. I want to start overall with the pros and cons. And now, Stoney, you are going to get the pros. Mike, you're going to get the cons. What are the pros and cons of the size and style being so similar between Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard? Like, what are the pros and cons for the team or for the players or for the quarterbacks? Doesn't matter. Pros and cons for having a similar size and style. We'll start with the pros with you, Stoney.
Yeah, I mean, I think the clearest pro right off the bat, I think of the ability to run your offense no matter what with running backs that have similar skill sets. You don't have to change things up. It takes away an element of predictability to the offense if no matter who you put out there, they can all do the same sort of thing. And on top of that, they happen to have a more robust skill set as running backs. I know, man, you go back and watch some of the tape from last year and there's a lot of just like dump offs to the flat, but I feel like Spears and Pollard are both capable of getting out and running routes, doing several different things, and you are not limiting your offense to its personnel when you have two guys that are in the same mold like that, and you're not tipping your hand anymore to opposing defenses based on your personnel. Who's out on the field, you're going to be doing a certain thing like that. So that's what immediately comes to mind, is just the ability to keep your offense humming right along and maintaining a level of unpredictability throughout.
Mike,
what are some cons? Are there any cons? You can say there's not if you want.
I mean, I do like the setup, so I will point out a few. I mean, it's not perfect, right? Because you don't have a true sledgehammer, right? Like, you don't have that big back. I think Pollard weighs, 208, somewhere around there. So, you know, you don't have the 220 plus pound, thick guy that you can kind of slam in there. And you don't have the guy that, kind of like Derrick Henry, we talked about, over the course of a game, over the course of a season, taking body blows from that guy. It does have kind of a cumulative effect on the defense. It's not going to be the same with Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard. So you don't have that differentiation in styles, and you don't have the ability to, if a certain team has 215-pound linebackers out there that they use, and you want to be able to punish them by kind of running over those guys, you just don't have that skill set. Now, I think that skill set is largely overrated to some degree. So I'm not saying they're going to miss this hugely, but I think that's the one kind of downside that I see to them being so similar.
I will say this:
we talk a lot of
if from just a stylistic standpoint, I think Spears and Pollard are both much tougher, harder runners than they're given credit for by the larger NFL fan base. I'm doing a film Friday on the two running backs this week, and Tony Pollard's touchdown from the Packers' loss in the playoffs is a great example of that. A guy willing to just lower his shoulder and hammer into the defensive line and successfully churn out yards. The durability concern, I think, is valid with their frames, but I think they can be used more as a hammer than people are realizing right now.
Yeah. And I think the short yardage thing is completely overrated. I think small backs can be good in short yardage. And I think some big backs are bad in short yardage, frankly. So I think Spears excelled in that department last year. I think he had one of the highest success rates in short yardage carries in the NFL, actually. So I'm not worried about that aspect of it.
Well, there's a lot to be said about filling the void that Derrick Henry left. And I think filling the void, looking for a 1,500-yard rusher to come out of this backfield is probably not realistic, to be honest with you. But there's also something to be said about filling the void of that spark, right? a lot of people misconstrue, and I write about this stackinginbox.com today. What's funny is that when I sent you all the texts that we're going to get into position groups and we're talking about the running backs, is when suddenly we're getting bugged. I think our group chat's getting bugged because that's when everybody else started talking running backs like a day after Bucks got all this stuff about running backs on the show. And I did not tell him that we were going to be talking about it. So I know that he didn't. So I guess he's taken his content stealing to a new hacking levels. But I wrote about stackinginbox.com. There is over 4,000 words talking about this backfield tandem. And one of the topics that I got really into was talking about the void left by the king. And to me, I think I look at it and I go, I think people, and I'm not to say that Derrick Henry is not a leader. I'm not in the locker room or anything. I'm not saying that. But I think that people equate talent and production to leadership when I think that there's different styles of leadership. And I think how Derrick Henry kind of led, and this is what I talked about, how he led is essentially like when he would crank off a large run or hit some poor defender with a stiff arm, the shockwaves and energy affected that entire team. That entire team got pumped. It's like plus 10 confidence levels, plus 10 morale boost, if you will. And that's a big void to fill. Now, we saw in the Miami game that Tyjae Spears is I call him a hype man. I don't know, and listen, because you're a hype man doesn't mean you're a leader. He's a hype man. Tony Pollard is on record being described as a quiet leader, and he really stepped into a leadership role after Zeke left Dallas last year. His position coach talked about it. His head coach talked about it. Talked about how he's a quiet coach. And listen, this team does not need a leader from the running back room. They have Will Levis. At least offensively, they have Will Levis that can provide that kind of spark and that leadership. They have Lloyd Cushenberry who could do it. Calvin Ridley has stepped into a really meaningful leadership role. DeAndre Hopkins kind of laid back. They don't need a running back leader per se like the Tennessee Titans have been forced to have from Derrick Henry, but they do need that spark. So, we've seen Tony Pollard break off long runs. We've seen Tyjae Spears, be impactful. Where are you guys at? And I'll start with you, Mike, and we'll end with Stoney. Where are you at on these guys being able to provide that kind of seismic shift in a game when you're kind of down? Kind of like, Derrick Henry just fucking ran, and then he'd shoot off a long one. And it just changed the whole game. Are these guys game changers in that way? I know they are in different ways, but in your opinion, can they fill that void?
This will probably be controversial for Derrick Henry fans out there. I think that part of it is completely overrated. I think players react to big plays, right? Like, and if those guys can make big plays, I think they'll react just the same. I mean, I guess the stiff arm adds a little bit extra sauce to it, but I don't think there's any less if Tyjae Spears is running through a hole and shakes a guy out of his shoes and he falls down on himself and the whole crowd goes, oh, I think they react to that energy of the big play. And so to me, there's no drop off. If they play well on the field, the energy that they bring to the offense will follow. And I think other guys, Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, I think all those guys can bring energy as well. Just because, hey, when you make a chunk play, people get fired up and it gets the ball rolling. So I don't think Henry was special in the fact that his big plays were more meaningful than other players. I just think he made more big plays over that course of, his career with the Titans than most of the other players on the team. So that's why we associated that with him.
Stoney.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, as far as the energy standpoint goes, I feel like Tyjae Spears, like you said, Zach, hype man. I feel like there's a lot of energy around this guy. With Derrick Henry, I think the leadership was more about setting the standard, right? We saw the epic workout videos and how hard he worked inside the building. He was the guy that from a competition standpoint, the rest of the roster was trying to chase to get up to his level. So in that sense, maybe he wasn't the guy that was rah-rah pumping people up on the sideline, but you knew he worked hard and you didn't want to disappoint the guy because he was the best at his position in the NFL. So I think that's where a lot of his leadership stemmed from. And I think I'm not going to say Tony Pollard's in the same echelon as Derrick Henry, but he's a hard worker. He runs with a really hard style. I just mentioned, like, he's not afraid to lower his shoulder. It's like he plays like he's 10 feet tall and bulletproof. I think Spears plays with an infectious energy that is just going to rub off on the entire offense, especially when if they change it up and start giving him more consistent drives instead of interchanging Spears and Henry every few plays or so. Like, if he can really get into a rhythm, I think his energy is going to rub off on a lot of people. And so when you start hitting some of those big plays and guys start seeing like, oh, these dudes are pretty tough, I think that's something that's going to rub off and set a new sort of example where it's like, maybe not like we need to be in the weight room doing all this crazy stuff, but it's like these guys are out here playing hard. They're running hard. We need to match the energy. And I think that's where the leadership comes from both of these guys. And by the way, Zach, I want you to take another victory lap because you compared Tyjae Spears to Tony Pollard after the Senior Bowl before the draft even happened last year. And I've been watching the tape this week and I'm like, holy shit, these are the same. This is the same player. It's crazy.
I'm telling you. So Tyjae Spears, what got everybody talking about the running back stuff was that Tyjae Spears went on record and said that, him and Tony Pollard are really iron sharpening iron. They're really pushing each other because their goal is to both be top 5 running backs in the league. And we know that when people say, I want to be the top 5 running back in the league, that comes down to rushing yards. And just to put it that in perspective, 2023 to be top 5, all you had to get was 1,050 yards. Let's just first marinate on that real quick. That 1,050 yards got you 5th place in the league, which is wild to me. That's the state of the NFL right now. That would have only taken 10 more carries from Tony Pollard. That would have taken 133 more carries from Tyjae Spears. So a big, we're talking about 262 for Tony Pollard, 233 for Tyjae Spears for last year. That's what it would have taken for them to get top 5 each into there. It's not out of the realm of possibility because it's kind of like, to me, when you look at the Tennessee Titans trio of wide receivers. Now, I talked about this on Monday, the fact that if you kind of look at it, right, that I don't think the team is going to bring off those 3 wide receivers enough, a lot. I just don't think the way that they've operated over at Cincinnati and everything does not seem like you're going to see those guys come off the field. It's going to be those 3 guys almost exclusively every game. And it's going to be these 2 guys 100% of the time. I think it's even more of a swing in favor of these 2 guys. Maybe Dylan Johnson or Julius Chestnut, whoever gets running back 3, gets maybe 2 carries at the goal line, but you're talking about 2 guys that are going to get the majority of touches for this team at the running back position. And really, if you could look at it, right? So let's say they get 422 carries and they, as a unit, and they both get 2,068 yards. One of them is going to be outside the top 5, but I mean, that's a pretty good, chunk of change for 2 guys to share in the backfield. And that's just rushing yards, not including what they're going to get receiving yards. So in your all's mind, what do you think about this top 5 thing? Like, is there a real chance with the state of the NFL and how kind of like the running back issue? I mean, like I said, all it took was 1,050 yards last year to get in top 5. So Stoney, I'll start with you. What do you think?
We've been kind of teetering around this for the last few weeks now. And I kind of feel like people are going to be surprised at how well this team runs the ball. Now, this is making a lot of assumptions, right? We think that Bill Callahan is going to influence the schemes, that they're going to be running more gap stuff. The personnel upgrades, the left side of the line, to me, looks pretty damn good with J.C. Latham, Peter Skoronski, and Lloyd Cushenberry from left tackle to center. And then adding Tony Pollard, an expanded role maybe for Tyjae Spears. I think there's going to be we're also hyper focused on the passing game, and rightfully so, because it's been pretty damn sexy this offseason to think about and watch those Bengals teams with Joe Burrow just slinging it all over the place. But man, this team is kind of quietly built to run the ball really well, especially with two guys that can run the ball through traffic pretty well, that can wiggle around in the open field. They're playmakers at the position. And I don't know, man. Like, I don't think it's all that crazy to say. It might sound crazy, but when you look around the state of the NFL, I don't know. I mean, how many 1,000-yard rushers are there going to be this season? So I feel like if you can get both of those guys to top that mark, you got a pretty good chance of them being top 5. And I'm not going to be surprised at all if they hit on that.
Mike, it seems like the way that has to happen is that they have to be efficient, because if you look at what the Bengals have averaged, you're talking about anywhere from 402 is probably the straight average, 403 carries allotted to the entire running back room from 2019, 2023. But you also probably are looking at maybe, well, you could probably get to 423, maybe max is what you're looking at, because they hover around the 24th mark in attempts and rushing attempts, right? I mean, so when you're looking at that, they're going to have to be efficient. So can these two guys, have they shown you enough throughout their stops? I mean, obviously Tyjae Spears just won, but Tony Pollard has about 4 or 5 years of data. Can they be efficient and still be a tandem that can get at least close to 1,000 yards? Maybe they're a little bit more of A.J. Brown, Corey Davis, A.J. Brown's rookie year, but can they be efficient enough to maybe crack that top 5 in a split backfield?
I think the running backs absolutely can, because I mean, I think if you look at what Spears did last year, limited sample size and all that, fair. But I think everyone pretty much, eye test tells you Spears is a guy, right? Like, he can play. Pollard has 5 years of NFL experience. 4 of those years he finished in the top, I believe, 3 in yards after contact per attempt. So he has a long track record of being able to make the most out of his carries, as far as breaking tackles and then producing big plays after the tackle. So I think they will be highly efficient. I think it will ultimately rest on what can Bill Callahan get this offensive line to look like from a run blocking unit standpoint. Because look, I believe fully in Bill Callahan. I also believe fully in the talent of J.C. Latham. I believe fully in the talent of Peter Skoronski. I think the question is, it's going to be a young group. We know that. I mean, right now, based on what they're rolling out at OTAs, which, like, even if it's MPF, it's kind of interchangeable. Right now, the oldest guy on that line is going to be Lloyd Cushenberry at 26. Almost certainly, because I don't think Brunskill is going to be the starter at right guard. That's a young group, so it's going to be, can you get that group? Look, the good news is that the upside's tremendous, right? Like, because if they can click, that's a group that you can grow with for the next 3 or 4 years and really have like something special together, where like you have the same 5 guys starting pretty much every year for a while. But I think the question in year 1 is going to be, what can the offensive line do? Because I think if the offensive line can give them enough space, I have zero doubts about these running backs. Like, I think they're both really, really good. And I took a lot of shit from Colts fans for saying that I think the Titans have the best running back room in the division. But I stand by that. I think Jonathan Taylor's really good. But Evan Hull is their backup, I believe, right now. And the combination of Jonathan Taylor, who's going to miss time most likely, he's done it the last 2 years, missed a lot of time, and Evan Hull versus what you get with Spears and Pollard, who I don't think are far off of JT overall talent-wise, but you get 2 of them. I think, to me, it's the best running back room in the division. I think they're explosive. I think they'll be very efficient if given the opportunity by this offensive line.
Stoney, I want to talk to you, because on Friday we're going to record something for Stacking the Inbox subscribers. We're going to be talking about the run game. We're going to break down some film, talk about some more advanced metrics. And of course I wrote about it. You're also doing a film breakdown of just Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard for Friday. So we got a lot of running back content coming out this week. And for those that may have missed it over last summer, the John Ojukwu Film Room is making a return on Thursday, tomorrow. I mean, we're going to re-up that because John Ojukwu is RT1 so far in OTAs and minicamp. So
love to see
OJ season.
Yeah, so we got to make sure that we get some Ojukwu love as well. But we're talking about this Callahan effect. We're talking about the offensive line, and we know that it plays into the efficiency of your running backs. But let's talk about gap, zone, and all this stuff just real quick. You know, the last 2 years of the Bengals, they have switched to a gap scheme throughout the entirety of the Bill Callahan tenure in Cleveland. It's been mainly a gap scheme. So we're talking about a difference. Now, listen, John Gall here said today they're doing more pin and pull. Can you first? We'll get back to what I was about to ask, but I wanted to do this. Can you explain to just real quick to our listeners or watchers what that means? What does doing more pin and pull mean, and what does it fit, zone or gap?
Yeah, so pin and pull is a gap scheme where you like basically pull both of the guards and move them in the same direction, and then the remaining tackles and center kind of block in one direction. So you're kind of trying to like move the defensive line out of the way and create a double team, maybe even a triple team if you have a fullback or a tight end there that you want to block. And so you're kind of really hammering this hole at the edge to try and blow the gap open for the running back to come in, make a simple read, go right on through. That's kind of the crux of the difference, right? A gap scheme, think of it as like it is a gap scheme is designed to blow open a specific gap. And the zone, you're asking the running back to do a little more reading, which the Titans did like a ton of outside zone and inside zone last year. And last year, the Cleveland Browns under Bill Callahan ran the second most power in the entire league, behind only the Baltimore Ravens, which is another gap scheme where you're only pulling one guard and getting them out to the edge. And doing this kind of stuff, man, like it's hard. I've been deep in the weeds. I haven't left the house in 3 days. I didn't even shower yesterday. Like I'm dingy as hell on this show today, but I've been watching a lot of the Cleveland Browns tape, and it's interesting to watch and kind of think about how they use Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller, who are two of the more premium guards in the NFL, and project the personnel that the Titans are going to have to use to run it successfully. And I think that's the big unknown here. But I think running a gap scheme, if you've got athletic offensive linemen that can move around a little bit, if they're going to pull guards an awful lot. The Browns ran a lot more counter as well, which is another gap play where you're pulling the left tackle and the left guard or vice versa, and they're coming across the formation to try and create a double team and open up a lane. I think you've got to have athletic guys that are able to pull it off, but it does simplify things for the running backs. And I think that's something that's going to unlock another level for Tajay Spears specifically, is that you're eliminating the reads that they have to do, right? If it's designed to go to a specific gap, you guys shut me up if I'm starting to. This is going to be another Travis.
Well, let me say something real quick. Do you think that because you got 11 minutes anyway? So
Jesus, I do.
Do you think that is you and mentioned something that you think you cracked the code as to why Tajay Spears was more efficient in the gap schemes last year? He's better in gap. He had higher yards per attempt, higher yards after catch or yards after contact per attempt, and a way higher missed tackle percentage in the gap scheme.
Yeah.
Now I'm waiting on some information so I can be able to see how Skoronski did, how Sadiq Charles did, and these other guys, because that's what I'm writing about next year in the particular schemes.
Sure.
But why is it? Because it was so simple for Tajay Spears, I think because he ran a lot of zone in college.
Yeah, I think you see it on the tape. If you watch his Titans tape from a season ago, there's a couple of times that he in his rushing attempt, getting to the offensive line, getting to the point of where he's got to cut and go or bounce it outside or whatever, he gets to the point of his read, and there's like the slightest stutter step, the slightest moment of hesitation, where it looks like he stops his momentum just enough. You're already behind an offensive line that is bad. So you don't have a lot of time to kind of dance around back there. And I think if you eliminate that read for him, where you just know, like, here's the gap, go to it. If the gap's not open, then you make your read and you try to make something happen, right? But this gap should be open, and if it is, you just go. So it is more of like a streamlined process from the neck up, where it removes the time he has to take to read what's happening in front of him and process it. So he can hit the gap harder, more decisively, without slowing down, without losing any momentum, without the stutter step or hesitation or any of that stuff. I think it can improve his metrics even more. And when I read your piece that dug up the data on Tyjae Spears so far on stacking the inbox, that was the light bulb moment for me, because I jotted it down in my notes. I'm like, he does this weird thing sometimes where he like stutter steps and hesitates. But then when I saw the numbers, I'm like, oh, well, that could be an explanation for why his metrics look better in a gap scheme. So I've cracked the code.
Let me ask you this, Mike, because we got to start wrapping this up here in just a few minutes. But we have a question in the chat, and I think this is a good thing to end on. And the question is, and this is from Glory Day Sports, question is, does that suit Sadiq Charles, Daniel Brunskill, Dylan Radins? And in the piece, I talk about how the people that they have assembled, the guys that were on this team last year that have gained weight, it really feels like they have built this whole offensive line with, while you still have to have some athletic level of NFL athleticism, big beefy men. And it really seems like they built with the idea of doing a heavy gap scheme. Now, this means that they'll use 54% gap, 46% so. Like, I mean, it's not like they're going 100% gap. So there's always going to be multiple facets to the run game. But as what we have heard so far is that we know what the left side is. We know who the center is. But we've heard that it's been mainly Sadiq Charles and John Ojukwu. Sadiq Charles yesterday was kind of dancing around the fact that he's gotten the majority of the right guard reps. Dylan, rest in peace, Dylan Radins. And then the second team, though, has been the Duncan at right tackle, Dylan Radins at right guard, and because they've moved Daniel Brunskill to center. And today, while we were on the air, Daniel Brunskill said this is to get them through the summer, which I did say I thought that Daniel Brunskill would be the thing. So maybe they're looking to add another center. This Xavier Godlin kid from Liberty is listed as a center on the website, Titans website.
Really?
Don't know about that, but that's obviously why Daniel Brunskill's there. We've heard that left tackle is on the left side. On the second team is Leroy Watson, which is very interesting, which probably makes sense. And I would assume second team left guard is, from what I've heard, is described as some kid that nobody really recognizes, and I assume that's Cole Spencer, Andrew Rupsich. So all of that to say, we know that we're trending towards, obviously, a gap-heavy scheme. Who does that benefit on this roster on that right side? Because Sadiq Charles is probably a little bit known more for his athleticism than his size, though he's not small by any means. Dylan Radins has always been known more for his athleticism, but he's gained weight. We know that Skoronski's gained weight, but he plays on the left side. And Daniel Brunskill looks like he's 50, but he's pretty hefty and everything. And then you got Jalen Duncan, who, again, known more for his athleticism than his size. John Ojukwu, who's a big dude. And so, like, who does an MPF, of course, who has shrunk down. So really, who does this all benefit on that right side? And who do you think, because we're going to keep up with it as we go along, who do you think is the starting right side of this offensive line?
And I will say, I had this, if you listen to the show, and someone will have to go back and find it, but late in one of the more recent episodes, and it's probably been within the past 2 months, I said Sadiq Charles was going to be the starting right guard for this team. And I actually wrote about that for Paul's site, paulkowarski.com, this week, and submitted it last night. It's not up today because I think he's slotting it in with some other minicamp content on the site. But basically, I said, yeah, it's going to be Sadiq Charles in my mind. They signed him specifically. They went and got him. early in free agency too. That was like one of their first signings, I believe. It was like Tony Pollard, and then like Sadiq Charles was like the next one. And of course, everyone freaks out because they're like, "Oh, that's your big answer on the offensive line." But look, he's 24 years old. He is the biggest of the, at least is what their listed weights are. He's the biggest of the right guards because Radin's listed at 301, Brunskill's listed at 300, Charles is listed at 322. I think he's clearly the most powerful as far, and that's the key to, like, it's not exactly about how big you are. Big and power do go together to some degree, but he is the most powerful by far. From an ability to move guys off the line of scrimmage, and in a gap scheme, that is absolutely critical because if you don't get movement, you don't have a hole, right? Like that is paramount to being able to have success running the football in a gap scheme. Now, and Brunskill, to me, was brought in last year to fit the zone scheme that Vrabel was running with Tim Kelly and going back all the way to Matt LaFleur. They were so zone heavy. Derrick Henry had gotten great at that. And that was, to me, a signing for that scheme. So I don't think Brunskill is a fit for this offense. I don't think he's the guy that's going to get the job. Charles, his play is up and down. Like, I think pass protection is a work in progress for him. Certainly, I think he needs some development. But, I mean, look, Dylan Radins isn't perfect in pass protection either. I think to me, if I had to rank him today, it's Charles, Radins, Brunskill as the most likely. But to me, I just think it's going to be Sadiq Charles. I think the fact that he has a relationship with Lloyd Cushenberry, close friends, like I think they described each other as like their best friends. The fact that they have that relationship and they're going to be playing next to each other theoretically, I think that does matter to some degree. Now, it doesn't overcome like, okay, he's just better than him, but that communication will be easier with those two guys next to each other. I just think he's got more upside than Dylan Radins. Frankly, I think he's more powerful, and ultimately, I think that's the trait to me that's going to win the day at that spot.
I couldn't have said it any better myself.
Okay, just real quick because you got to go, Stoney. Prediction on who will see the majority of the snaps at running back. Stoney?
Tyjae Spears.
Ooh, okay. And what is the percentage of snaps? Like, just throw like a rough estimate of snap splits.
55-45.
Okay, if you have to go ahead and go. Mike, what is yours?
I'm going to go 56-46 Pollard. Or 56-44. Yeah. No, 46 because they're going to be on the field for a little bit together.
Okay. I'm going to go roughly like a 60-40, and I'm going to go with Tony Pollard. I think Tony Pollard will get the majority. I think really it's probably like 55-45 or something like that, but that's where I land. Real quick, Stoney, running back 3 is going to be
Dylan Johnson.
I agree. We already know your answer, Mike. Because
chestnuts roasting on an open fire, baby.
You are the Nutcracker King, is what I like to call you.
We got to crack them nuts.
Dylan Johnson is a much better version of Julius Chestnut, so it'll be fantastic to see Dylan Johnson, Julius Chestnut, and Kyle Pecco no longer on this team. Your two guys. That will do it for Football and Other F Words. Next week, we'll be talking about the wide receiver. We'll hopefully have less to talk about on the OTAs and all that kind of stuff, but that's what we'll be talking about next week.
I thought we were going to be talking about Luka Doncic and the Mavs winning the NBA championship next week.
Well, maybe we will if they actually get it done and they don't choke. We could do it. We'll talk about it. Bluegrass Beverages is our sponsor. Has been over 50 years in business over in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Worth the drive. They have so much selection, a lot of unique stuff over at Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, Tennessee. And that will do it for us. This has been Football and Other F Words, and you have just been effed.